Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I'm sharing the books that I read in January and February. It is March and I've read so many great books in the first 2 months of the year, and I finally have enough content to do a wrap-up video, monthly wrap-up videos, which I'm trying to stay consistent on my channel because I feel like monthly wrap-up videos kind of like set the tone for me. It really just keeps me on my reading pace, keeps me on my reading goal, and just keeps me in check. So anyway, we're gonna start with the first book that I read in January. I started the month off by reading The Vanishing Half by Bennett. I am so glad that I read this book as my first one. I remember after reading it, it kind of just like got me back into reading again. I loved it so much that it just reinvigorated my love for reading good books, and that's all I can really say. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. The premise is following these twin sisters who run away from their small southern black community at the age of 16, and they lead very different lives. It is kind of like a multi-generational tale because we do follow their daughters, the perspective of their daughters, and it was just super interesting. I didn't really know where the story would lead at first because, a funny story actually, my sister had bought this book and it was on my shelf and I was like, okay, I've like heard about this everywhere. So I decided to pick it up because I was interested, and it ended up being like one of my favorite books of the month. So I'm excited to say that. It follows like very important topics like colorism, racism, and identity. I also think that this is a very character-driven book. If you're someone like me who loves character-driven stories, you'll definitely just love this book so much because I think a lot of it is driven by the development of the characters. It talks a lot about family, and I think it talks a lot about their desires. It explores their desires and motivations behind a lot of what they do and how their community impacts that. So anyway, I give this book a 5 out of 5 stars. You should definitely pick it up if you haven't already. The next book that I read, I actually finished the entire Broken Earth trilogy in January and February, and I only have the third book to show you because the first 2 books are at home and I brought this one with me to college to finish up the series because I definitely wanted to get a head start. If there was one series in 2021 that I knew I wanted to read, it was this one, because this series has been on my shelf for as long as I started booktube, which is probably 4 or 5 years ago. So I just really wanted to pick it up in 2021, and I did by picking up the 5th season in January, loving it, and after that you really can't stop because the next books are just so amazing as well. So I'm just gonna go over just like a quick premise of it because giving too much away about the series absolutely ruins it. This series takes place in a world that is kind of cruel. They call him Father Earth, and basically Father Earth is fed up with humankind. There are like, I think, references and themes to like climate change and environmental destruction and degradation. I think that was super interesting reading it from an environmentalist perspective. So anyway, this world hates humans, and every few years there are these catastrophic extinction events called the 5th season. And in the first book, the 5th season, we start out with our main character kind of being dropped into this 5th season and experiencing it in the midst of it. And just everything was done so well. Like, if you know about these 3 books, all 3 books won the Hugo Award in the year that they were published. And if that doesn't tell you to pick the books up, like, I don't know what will. I definitely think for first-time fantasy readers, a lot of people ask me after I posted about this book, like, what N.K. Jemisin book should I start with? And I couldn't really answer that question since these were the only books that I read from her. I would definitely say I am not a seasoned fantasy reader. I don't really have much experience reading fantasy. I actually am bad at reading fantasy. I don't know if that's a thing, but usually when I read fantasy, I get really confused super easily, and I find myself not being able to read a lot of the more complicated fantasy. Like, I could not get into Strange Dreams of Gods and Monsters, that series, that whole thing. So anyway, I think that if you're like me and you don't read a lot of fantasy, I think the first book will be a little confusing to you, but I also think that was the point. Like, in the first book of a high fantasy series, you're not really supposed to know what's going on yet. You're not supposed to have everything all figured out. And I think for me, being the controlling person that I am, was so aggravated by that. I was like, oh my god, like, why don't I know what's happening? Why don't I have all the answers? But that's the beauty of this series, is that it kind of reveals itself to you super slowly, and the pace of it being dragged out and revealed is just so beautiful, and how by the 3rd book everything is wrapped up super nicely and you kind of have an idea of what's going on, and then you just look back at the first book and you're like, Like, duh, that was what's happening. But anyway, I would recommend this if you still haven't read this and you've been wanting to, and you're a little hesitant as well, because so was I. The next book that I read in January was a book for school. It is The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. First, I was so pissed off with my copy because the pages were just like falling out, like as I read them. Like I took they were just falling out as I read them. I don't know, because probably the binding of the book. But anyway, I read this for my Victorian era lit class and I ended up giving it a 2 out of 5 stars. I'm not gonna waste too much time talking about this one. It's basically a detective novel that hinges on the theft of this like moonstone, and it's not that I didn't like the detective aspects of it, because I don't really read detective novels. I don't really have an investment in the genre itself. The characters were also super unlikable, which didn't keep me interested, and it was actually sometimes a struggle to read this book because I remember me wanting to put it down at so many points where the characters were just super unlikable and I couldn't because I had to read it for school. So coupled with that, I was just really just having a bad reading experience through the entire thing. But I respect people who have their own opinions about this book. I just didn't really like it. The next book that I read in January is The Project by Courtney Summers, and I got an arc of this from Wednesday Books, so thank you so much for sending me. I read it early, and I read it about the time that it was published, actually. The premise of this book is that it is a cult book that follows our main character, Lo, who is basically trying to expose this cult because her sister, who was a member, her sister kind of like fell off the face of the earth, and she's trying to find out if this cult had anything to do with it. She's basically just mad that her relationship with her sister kind of fell off the deep end, and she blames this cult for it, so she's trying to expose them because she thinks that they're not the people that they say they are. And it offered some really interesting like information about cults. I don't think I've ever read a book with a cult in it. I'm not sure. Obviously, we know about cults in mainstream media and all that. And other than that, I don't think this book presented any new information that I didn't really know from like mainstream representation of it. I did really enjoy, though. Courtney Summers' writing is just amazing. If you've read any of her other books, you know that her stories are very riveting and she can really hold your attention as a reader. The one thing that I really liked about this book was the perspective and the framing of this story, which is in the perspective of Lo, who is, in the beginning you find out that she's like interning at this like journalism place, I forgot where it was, this like publishing place, and she really wants to be a journalist and she really wants to get her writing out there, but her higher-ups are kind of just like ignoring her and treating her as an assistant and whatever. So she takes this opportunity when she has an inside scoop on interviewing this cult to use as her first like piece and her first exploration into journalism and trying to prove to her boss that she can like be a journalist and she can write. I really enjoy that perspective because then we get to see her interviewing these people, her being observant and seeing through her perspective of her just analyzing everything so well. I really enjoyed this. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars just because it didn't blow me away. I'm definitely comparing it to my experience of reading Sadie, which kind of blew me away. So because this book wasn't really new or anything, it was just enjoyable, I gave it a 3.5. Okay, now for my favorite book that I read in February. You are not ready for this one. Sunny Song Will Never Be Famous by Suzanne Park. If you've seen my book haul, my recent book haul, I hauled this book. This was sent to me early. It is a summer contemporary coming out in June, and the publisher sent me this, and I was super interested in this beforehand, so I snatched up and read it, and I devoured it, and I loved it. Like if you've never seen this book or if it's been on your radar, I would definitely go and pre-order it and support the author because pre-orders are very helpful. This book follows Sunny Song, our main character. She's a Korean American girl, and she basically gets her parents send her to a digital detox farm camp after finding her mixed up in some trouble with social media and all that. I can't really explain what the issue was because it just gives spoilers. But anyway, she gets sent to this digital detox farm camp where she has to learn to not be on her phone and not use social media for an entire month. And while she's there, she really just learns to appreciate life and to appreciate this good-looking guy that she meets there. And the romance is just so cute. It is a bit cheesy at times, but I found that coupled in with the more serious topics, this book is the perfect balance of cheesiness, of cheese, and like seriousness. And by seriousness, I mean this book talks a lot about culture. I think her kind of re-exploring her Korean American culture through like meeting the different people at the camp and like being away from her family for the first time, and talking about her sister. And then also in serious aspects, this book actually gives like, it sheds a light on like social media, which I think a book that at first I thought it was just gonna be like a fluffy and like contemporary, like using that as a premise, but it really dives into some of the deeper issues about like how our social media use is giving this kind of like clouded version of reality. And I think that's something that she begins to realize. And let me just tell you, the decision that she makes in this book, like the growth that she goes through, like even I couldn't believe that that this digital detox camp was able to change her. Because if I went to that camp, you know, I'd be coming right back onto my phone after I got out. But anyway, I really enjoy this book. There's so many just good things about this book that it's hard to kind of summarize in a wrap up what I loved most about it. I really also just loved just everything. Like, how else can I explain this? So yeah, you should definitely read this book when it comes out. The next book I read in February is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I'm kind of matching with the book today. This is a memoir from George M. Johnson, and I was a little bit hesitant going into this. I first of all regret that I didn't read it in 2020 when I purchased it. Like, I didn't immediately read it when I purchased it, but I thought I would pick it up for Black History Month last month, because this is a book that talks about Black joy, so I really wanted to read something with that, and this book definitely did not disappoint. I think I was a little hesitant because with memoirs, I tend to like go towards memoirs of people that I recognize in like pop culture or people that I'm like interested in, but I had actually never heard of George M. Johnson prior to reading this. I know, I'm like not that woke. But George M. Johnson is a journalist, LGBTQIA+ activist, and they do a lot of work, and I definitely did not know that, but reading this book, I am just completely in awe of them. I follow them on Twitter. And yeah, this book is just basically a memoir. It is geared towards the young adult readers, which I think helped me enjoy it so much more because it was a mix of a narrative style and then also just kind of like an essay. I think with a lot of memoirs, like adult memoirs, a lot of the ones that I have read have tended to be a lot more narrative, and not very like essay style. Like, they will explain memories and snapshots of their life, but they won't like contextualize it. And the reason why I really love this memoir, and it also made me cry. Like, come on, a book that makes you cry is an instant like 5-star. So this book, basically George M. Johnson, what they did was they like wrote about their memories and wrote about a time in their life where they experienced something that helped them grow. And then they followed up with contextualizing that piece in the larger like social context of being Black and queer in America and how it specifically like contributed to their learning of this event or their processing of the event. And I just really enjoy that. I think it was a very different style than I was used to. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. Please read it if you haven't. It's everywhere now though, so I think people at this point have picked it up, and I'm really glad that it's getting so much hype. Okay, and for the last book that I read in February, I ended off the month with a beautiful book known as Days of Distraction by Alexandra Chang. This book is super underrated that I'm kind of sad that it hasn't been receiving as much attention as I would want it to. First of all, I've never seen this on Bookstagram, and that means when I'm just like scrolling, I've never seen this picture pop up on my feed. This book is, the best way I can explain it is that it follows the life, or it is a portrait of this young Chinese woman, and as she's making a huge move from like across the country, from California to New York, and it is just the best way I can that's like the best way I can sum it up. And it is a portrait of her figuring out her life. It is a woman who is just confused in life. She's figuring out a lot of things. She's grappling with a lot of changes, and she's figuring out her relationship, her family, her culture, her identity, and then also her career at the same time. The reason I love this book was also another character-driven book. This is like one of the best character-driven books I've ever read, mostly because I've never read a book that has captured my overthinking and anxious personality. I think a lot of the thoughts in this book is very much inner monologue-y. It's very much the main character kind of just overthinking through everything, being anxious about everything, and you can kind of see that coming off on the page, and I just really appreciated for that, kind of like that representation. I felt seen in this book. It's other than that, I really don't know how to explain it other than it's just very raw, it's very moving. There are a lot of microaggressions in this book. And I think especially now, like currently with like all this anti-Asian like sentiment, reading this book kind of hit different. It was kind of like, oh, I've experienced that in my life before. That wasn't really cool. And in the book, you can see that the character kind of reacted the same way that I would have reacted in those kind of situations. And it just like opened my eyes to me, and I was like, yeah, I've never read a book like this, and I really enjoyed it. If this has been on your list, definitely read it and pick it up, and if it hasn't, I would definitely just check it out. And if you're interested in books that you can get through pretty quickly, that pack a really big punch, I would definitely check this out. So those were all the books that I ended up picking in the first 2 months of the year. I'm super excited for the rest of this year. I think it's just been a really great year so far for reading. Last year I was a little bit behind on my Goodreads goal, and it's not that I'm trying to hit some type of number of books. I just want to have enough content and enough stuff to talk about with people, because I love reading. It's very relaxing, and I also like talking about my love for reading and the types of books that I read. So anyway, those were all the books I read. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up so I know to film more monthly wrap-ups, and I will see you on my next one. Bye.